Hello, and welcome to our channel, Stories with Silas. We hope you enjoy watching.
Maria's throat constricted as she named the 23rd spice, the metallic taste of lead chromate spreading through her mouth like fire. The billionaire would live because she'd tasted the poison meant for him, but she was already collapsing to the floor. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The silence that descended upon Saffron and Cedar, one of Miami's most prestigious Mediterranean fusion restaurants, was suffocating. Servers froze mid-step, diners paused with forks halfway to their mouths, and the gentle background music of the ode seemed to fade into nothingness. All eyes turned to table 12, where an impeccably dressed billionaire sat forward in his chair, his dark eyes fixed on the young waitress standing before him. His voice, though not loud, carried across the dining room with unmistakable authority. 23 spices, he said, gesturing to the elaborately plated dish before him. Name every single one, or you're finished here. You have 5 minutes. Maria Rodriguez had never been one to seek the spotlight. At 28, she was simply trying to survive in one of America's most expensive cities, juggling rent, bills, and the mounting medical expenses for her 7-year-old daughter, Isabella, who suffered from a chronic respiratory condition that required ongoing treatment. When Maria had landed the job at Saffron and Cedar 6 months ago, it felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The tips alone could cover Isabella's medications for a month, maybe even allow Maria to finally catch up on the bills that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Nestled in the heart of Miami's design district, Saffron and Cedar was the brainchild of Chef Omar Hassan, a James Beard Award winner who had revolutionized Mediterranean cuisine by incorporating authentic Middle Eastern spices with contemporary American cooking techniques. The restaurant's interior was a study in understated luxury. Copper pendant lights hung from exposed wooden beams, hand-painted Moroccan tiles adorned the walls, and the open kitchen allowed diners to watch as chefs worked their magic over open flames and traditional tagines. It was the kind of place where celebrities dined incognito, where business deals worth millions were sealed over plates of saffron-infused lamb and pomegranate-glazed duck. The staff at Saffron and Cedar was held to impossibly high standards. Each server was required to complete a month-long training program that covered not just service techniques, but also the history and flavor profiles of hundreds of spices used in the kitchen. Maria had studied religiously, staying up late after Isabella fell asleep, flashcards spread across her tiny kitchen table in their cramped Hialeah apartment. She memorized the difference between Turkish sumac and Persian sumac, learned that real saffron should smell like honey and hay, discovered that cardamom pods came in 3 varieties, each with its own distinct flavor. But this, standing before one of the wealthiest men in America, being tested like a student facing expulsion, was something no training could have prepared her for. Michael Ashford was a name that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. The billionaire founder of TechCore Industries had built his empire on predictive algorithms and data analysis software that had revolutionized everything from financial markets to urban planning. His net worth, according to the latest Forbes estimate, exceeded $12 billion. He was known for his exacting standards, his photographic memory, and his passion for authentic Middle Eastern cuisine, a love he'd developed during his years studying at MIT, where he'd befriended students from across the Arab world. Tonight, Ashford had arrived without a reservation, his presence at the restaurant causing a subtle panic among the staff. The maitre d' had scrambled to accommodate him at table 12, the best table in the house, with a view of both the open kitchen and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Miami skyline. Maria, who had been assigned to the VIP section that evening, felt her stomach drop when she realized she would be serving him. Now, as she stood before him, The fate of her employment, her daughter's medical care, and her entire precarious existence hanging in the balance. Maria felt the weight of every eye in the restaurant upon her. The dish before Ashford was Chef Hassan's masterpiece, lamb shoulder Marrakesh, a complex creation that took 3 days to prepare and incorporated a spice blend that was the restaurant's most closely guarded secret. 4 minutes, 30 seconds, Ashford said, glancing at his watch, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I suggest you begin. Maria's hands trembled as she leaned closer to the plate. Her mind raced through everything she'd learned in her 6 months at Saffron and Cedar, every late-night study session, every moment she'd spent in the kitchen watching Chef Hassan work his magic. But knowing spices in theory and identifying them in a complex dish under this kind of pressure were two entirely different things. She thought of Isabella, asleep in their apartment under the watchful eye of Mrs. Alvarez, their elderly neighbor who charged next to nothing for babysitting because she understood what it meant to struggle. Isabella's inhaler sat on their bathroom counter, the prescription refill due in 3 days. Without this job, without the tips that came from serving Miami's elite, Maria had no idea how she would afford it. Her daughter's health insurance, bare bones as it was, covered only a fraction of the monthly medication costs. 4 minutes, Ashford announced, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Maria took a steady breath and began her examination. The lamb shoulder before her had been slow-cooked until the meat fell away from the bone in tender, glistening pieces. A rich, mahogany sauce cloaked the meat, dotted with what appeared to be pomegranate seeds and crushed pistachios. The aroma alone was intoxicating, a symphony of warm, earthy, and sweet notes that seemed to shift and change with each breath. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing her other senses to sharpen. This was something her grandmother, Abuela Carmen, had taught her years ago in their small kitchen in Puerto Rico. The nose knows before the tongue, she used to say, grinding cumin and coriander in her worn molcajete. Those childhood memories of watching her grandmother transform simple ingredients into magical meals had sparked Maria's love of cooking and her fascination with spices. I can smell cumin, Maria began, her voice stronger than she felt. It's there in the base layer, earthy and warm. Ashford's expression remained neutral, but he gestured for her to continue. Coriander seed, ground. It has that citrusy undertone that balances the cumin. She leaned closer, inhaling deeply. Cinnamon, not the common cassia variety, but true Ceylon cinnamon. You can tell by the more delicate, almost floral sweetness. Around the dining room, conversations had completely ceased. Other servers stood frozen, some with trays balanced on their hands, watching the drama unfold. Chef Hassan had emerged from the kitchen, his tall chef's hat visible above the pass, his face a mixture of concern and curiosity. He'd trained Maria himself, spent hours teaching her about spices, but this was beyond anything he could have prepared her for. Maria continued, her confidence growing slightly with each correct identification. Black pepper, but freshly ground. The pungency is too sharp for pre-ground. And there's cardamom, green cardamom specifically, providing that eucalyptus-like quality. She carefully lifted a small piece of the lamb with the fork beside the plate, examining it more closely. The meat had been marinated for days, the spices having penetrated deep into the fibers. She could see the telltale dark specks and russet hues that indicated a complex rub. Paprika, but it's smoked paprika. Spanish, if I had to guess. The subtle charred note gives it away. Maria's mind was working overtime now, pulling from every resource she had. There's allspice too, those round berries that taste like a combination of cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves all at once. 3 minutes, Ashford said, though something in his tone had shifted. He was leaning forward now, genuinely interested, perhaps even impressed. The pressure was mounting. Maria had identified 8 spices, which meant she needed to find 15 more. 15. In a dish that looked deceptively simple but was clearly a masterwork of culinary complexity. She thought about her daughter's sweet face, the way Isabella had hugged her goodbye that evening, whispering, "Good luck tonight, Mummy. I know you'll make good tips." This wasn't about tips anymore. This was about survival. Maria steadied herself and reached for the spoon beside the plate. She needed to taste it. There was no other way to identify all 23 spices. It was a risk. Protocol normally discouraged tasting a customer's food, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the spoon. Ashford nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "By all means." Maria lifted the spoon to her lips, taking the smallest possible amount of the sauce onto her tongue. Immediately, her palate exploded with flavor. It was like a perfectly orchestrated symphony, each note distinct yet harmonious, layers upon layers of complexity that would take a lifetime to fully understand. But she didn't have a lifetime. She had less than 3 minutes. "Turmeric," she said quickly, recognizing the earthy, slightly bitter undertone that gave the sauce its golden hue. It's subtle, but it's there, providing depth and that characteristic color. She took another careful taste, allowing the sauce to coat her tongue, reaching the different taste receptors. Ginger. Fresh ginger that's been grated fine. I can feel that slight tingle, that zingy heat that's different from pepper or chili. Ashford had pulled out his phone, and Maria's heart sank. Was he recording this humiliation? But no, he was checking something on his screen, perhaps a list, perhaps the actual spice blend. His expression remained unreadable, though his eyes held a glint of something she couldn't quite identify. Respect? Amusement? Challenge? Around them, the restaurant had become a theater, and Maria was the reluctant star of a show she'd never auditioned for. She caught sight of her colleague, James, a server who'd been at Saffron and Cedar for 3 years, watching her with wide eyes. James had once told her that in all his time at the restaurant, he'd never seen anyone successfully identify more than half the spices in Chef Hassan's signature dishes. The blends were too complex, too carefully guarded, but Maria had an advantage James didn't know about. Before coming to Saffron and Cedar, she'd worked for 2 years at a small spice import shop in Little Havana, a place called Especias del Mundo, run by an elderly Lebanese man named Mr. Khalil. He'd taught her things that went beyond textbook knowledge. He'd shown her how to feel spices between her fingers, how different growing regions affected flavor profiles, how to detect adulteration and authenticity. When the shop closed, due to Mr. Khalil's declining health, Maria had been devastated, not just because she lost a job, but because she lost a mentor. 2 minutes, 15 seconds, Ashford said. Maria's mind raced. She'd identified 10 spices, 13 more to go. She examined the lamb more closely, noticing the crust that had formed during the cooking process. "There's mustard seed," she said, pointing to tiny yellow spheres embedded in the meat. Yellow mustard seed, providing that sharp, tangy note. She inhaled again, deeper this time. Fenugreek, that slightly maple-like sweet aroma. It's often used in North African cooking, and I can detect it underneath the other spices. Her confidence was building, but so was something else. A strange warmth had begun spreading through her chest, subtle at first, barely noticeable. She attributed it to adrenaline, to the pressure of the moment. She took another small taste, analyzing the complex flavor profile. "Cloves," she continued, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. Just a touch, probably only 2 or 3 whole cloves in the entire marinade, but enough to provide that distinct, almost numbing quality. Chef Hassan had moved closer now, standing just behind the kitchen pass, his arms crossed over his chef's whites. His face showed concern, but also something like pride. He'd always believed Maria had a special gift, a palate that could distinguish flavors most people would miss entirely. He'd encouraged her to pursue culinary school, offered to write her a recommendation letter, but Maria couldn't afford to stop working even for a moment. Isabella's needs came first, always. "Nutmeg," Maria said, examining a piece of the meat more carefully. "Freshly grated, not the pre-ground version. You can tell by the intensity and the slightly oily sheen it leaves." She was at 14 spices now, 9 more to identify, and less than 2 minutes remaining. The weight of the challenge pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. Her throat felt slightly tight, though she assumed it was just anxiety manifesting physically. She'd experienced panic attacks before, knew what stress could do to the body. "Saffron," she announced, spotting the telltale crimson threads nestled in the rice pilaf that accompanied the lamb. "Persian saffron, not Spanish. The threads are slightly darker, and the flavor is more floral, less bitter." 1 minute 30 seconds, Ashford said, his eyes fixed on her with laser focus. Maria's pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to focus. 15 spices identified, 8 more to go. She examined the garnish more carefully, noticing small, dark seeds scattered artfully across the plate. They were so tiny, easy to miss entirely if you weren't looking for them. "Nigella seeds," she said, her voice slightly hoarse now. "Sometimes called black cumin, though they're not related to cumin at all. They have that slightly oniony, peppery taste that adds complexity without overwhelming." The warmth in her chest was spreading, creeping up her neck. She swallowed hard, trying to clear the tightness in her throat. Just stress, she told herself. Just anxiety. She couldn't afford to fall apart now, not when she was so close. "Sumac," she continued, recognizing the deep burgundy powder dusted along the edge of the plate. "It provides that lemony tartness, that bright acidity that cuts through the richness of the lamb." 17 spices, 6 more. Her mind was working at lightning speed, pulling from every memory, every lesson, every moment she'd spent learning about the world of spices. She thought of Abuela Carmen's voice. "Trust your instincts, mija. Instincts. Your senses will never lie to you." 1 minute, Ashford announced, though his tone had shifted. He was no longer the intimidating billionaire testing a lowly waitress. He was watching her with something approaching admiration, perhaps even wonder. Nobody, in all his years of dining at the finest restaurants around the world, had come this close to identifying a spice blend this complex. Maria took another small taste, smaller this time because her throat was getting tighter. The sensation worried her, but she pushed the concern aside. She had a job to save, a daughter to support, a future to secure. "Anise seed," she said, detecting that distinct licorice note that provided a subtle sweetness. "Just a hint, but it's definitely there in the background." Around the restaurant, people had started pulling out their phones, recording this extraordinary moment. A waitress, young and unassuming, going toe-to-toe with one of America's wealthiest men in a test of culinary knowledge. This was the kind of content that would explode on social media, the underdog story that everyone loved. James, her colleague, had his hands clasped together as if in prayer. Chef Hassan had moved even closer, his face a mask of tension and pride. The other diners were leaning forward in their seats, meals forgotten, completely absorbed in the drama unfolding before them. Maria studied the rice pilaf again, noticing the subtle variations in color. "Turmeric," she began, then stopped herself. She'd already identified turmeric. Think, Maria, think. What else could create those golden undertones? She leaned closer, inhaling deeply despite the growing discomfort in her chest. "Annatto," she said suddenly. "It's there with the turmeric, providing additional color and a slightly peppery, nutty flavor. It's often used in Middle Eastern rice dishes to achieve that deep golden hue. 19 spices. 4 more. 30 seconds remaining." Her vision had started to blur slightly at the edges, but Maria blinked hard, forcing herself to concentrate. She examined a small garnish she'd initially overlooked, tiny dried flowers that had been sprinkled over the dish. They were so delicate, so easily missed, but they were there for a reason. "Rose petals," she said, her voice now noticeably strained. "Dried rose petals, used in Persian cuisine for their floral notes and subtle sweetness. 20 spices, 3 more, 15 seconds. Maria's hands were shaking visibly now, and not just from nerves. Something was wrong. The warmth had become heat, spreading through her chest and up into her jaw. Her throat was constricting, making it difficult to breathe properly. But she was so close, so impossibly close. She forced herself to take one more tiny taste, and there, underneath all the other layers, she detected it. A sharp, almost metallic note that didn't belong, something that made her tongue tingle in a way that had nothing to do with the ginger or pepper. "Bay leaf," she managed to say, her breathing shallow. "Turkish bay leaf, I think. And star anise. I can taste the difference between it and the anise seed. More intense, more complex. 22 spices. 1 more. 5 seconds." Maria looked at the dish, at the sauce glistening on the plate, and suddenly she knew. The final spice, the one that tied everything together, the one that was also making her increasingly ill. "Turmeric," she whispered, then realized her mistake. She'd already said turmeric. No, wait. Her mind was clouding. Not just turmeric. There's something else in the turmeric. Something that shouldn't be there. "Time," Ashford said, but his voice sounded distant to Maria, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. Maria's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. The restaurant seemed to tilt around her, the copper pendant lights above swirling like fireflies in the darkness. But her mind, even as her body began to fail her, was still working, still analyzing, still processing the information her senses were providing. "The 23rd spice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's in the turmeric. There's contamination, lead chromate. Someone added lead chromate to make the turmeric look more vibrant, more golden. It's an old, illegal practice, but it still happens in unregulated markets." The words left her mouth, and then her legs gave out entirely. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Maria collapsed to her knees first, then sideways, her body unable to support itself any longer. James rushed forward, catching her before her head hit the floor. Chef Hassan vaulted over the kitchen pass, his tall frame moving with surprising speed for a man of his size. "Call 911!" he shouted, cradling Maria's head in his hands. "Now!" But the most dramatic transformation was in Michael Ashford himself. The billionaire's face had gone from interested amusement to absolute horror in the span of a heartbeat. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, his phone already in his hand. "Don't let her lose consciousness," he barked to Chef Hassan, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding rooms full of executives. He was already dialing, but not 911. He was calling his personal physician, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, one of the country's leading toxicologists, who stayed on retainer for exactly these kinds of emergencies. "Elizabeth, it's Michael. I need you at Saffron and Cedar immediately. Possible lead poisoning. Yes, lead chromate in turmeric. How did I know? Because a waitress just saved my life." The reality of the situation was crashing down on everyone in the restaurant simultaneously. Maria, in her desperate attempt to identify all 23 spices, had tasted the dish. Not much, just small samples, but enough. Enough to absorb a trace amount of the poison that had been meant for Michael Ashford. Someone, somewhere in the supply chain, had deliberately contaminated the turmeric with lead chromate, a toxic substance that gives the spice an artificially vibrant yellow color, making it appear more premium, more authentic. It was a practice that killed people every year in countries with loose food safety regulations. But here, In Miami? At a James Beard award-winning restaurant? Maria's eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on the ceiling, on the copper lights that seemed to pulse and dim. She could hear voices, urgent and overlapping, but couldn't make out individual words. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth, and her chest burned as if she'd swallowed fire. "Stay with us, Maria," Chef Hassan said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." Isabella. The name echoed in Maria's mind. Her daughter. Who would take care of Isabella if something happened to her? Mrs. Alvarez was kind, but she was old. She couldn't raise a child. Maria's parents were gone, her siblings scattered across the country, barely making ends meet themselves. Isabella needed her mother. She had to fight. She had to survive. She identified all 23, Ashford was saying into his phone, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Every single one, including the contaminated turmeric. If she hadn't tasted it, if she hadn't detected the metallic note, I would have eaten the entire dish. Do you understand what I'm saying, Elizabeth? This woman saved my life, and now she's dying because of it. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The restaurant's front doors burst open, and paramedics rushed in, their equipment clattering, their voices adding to the cacophony. They surrounded Maria, checking her vital signs, asking questions that Chef Hassan tried to answer. "Possible lead poisoning," one of the paramedics said into her radio. "Female, late 20s, responsive but deteriorating. We need gastric lavage ready at the ER." As they lifted Maria onto the stretcher, her hand reached out weakly, grasping at nothing. "Isabella," she managed to whisper, "my daughter." Someone needs to call Mrs. Alvarez. Someone needs to take care of Isabella. "We'll take care of everything," Ashford said, appearing at her side, his hand gently covering hers. "Your daughter will be safe, I promise you that. Just focus on staying alive." The ambulance screamed through Miami streets, weaving through traffic with practiced precision. Inside, Maria drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting against the poison coursing through her system. The paramedics worked with urgent efficiency, establishing an IV line, monitoring her vitals, radioing ahead to Jackson Memorial Hospital's emergency department. "BP dropping," one paramedic called out. 80 over 50 and falling. In the front seat, Michael Ashford sat with his jaw clenched, his phone pressed to his ear. He'd insisted on riding in the ambulance, had refused to be left behind. His security team followed in a separate vehicle, along with Chef Hassan, who'd abandoned his kitchen in the middle of dinner service for the first time in 15 years. "I need a private room prepared," Ashford was saying to the hospital administrator. "The best toxicology team you have. I don't care what it costs. I want Dr. Elizabeth Chen admitted immediately as a consulting physician. She's already en route." Behind them, Miami's social media was exploding. The video of Maria's incredible spice identification, followed by her dramatic collapse, had been uploaded by at least a dozen diners. Within minutes, it had thousands of views. Within an hour, it would have millions. The hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Spice Challenge, hashtag Maria the Brave, hashtag Justice for Maria. But Maria knew nothing of her sudden fame. She was lost in fragmented memories and fever dreams. Isabella's laugh. Abuela Carmen teaching her to grind spices in the old molcajete. Mr. Khalil at Especias del Mundo, holding up a jar of saffron and explaining how to tell the real from the fake. Her daughter's small hand in hers, walking to the bus stop on the first day of school. "Stay with me, Maria," the female paramedic said, squeezing her hand. "We're almost there, just a few more minutes." At Jackson Memorial Hospital, the emergency department had been cleared and prepared. Dr. Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair, was already scrubbed in and waiting. She'd been Michael Ashford's personal physician for a decade, had saved his life once before when he'd suffered an allergic reaction during a business trip to Singapore. She owed him nothing, but she respected him. And she was curious about this waitress who'd apparently identified 23 spices and detected a poison in the process. The ambulance doors flew open and Maria was rushed inside, the fluorescent lights overhead blurring into streaks of white. Voices overlapped, medical jargon flying back and forth, chelation therapy, gastric lavage, activated charcoal, blood work, toxicology screening. "How much did she ingest?" Dr. Chen asked, her hands already examining Maria's eyes, checking her pupil response. "Small amounts," the paramedic responded. She was tasting the dish to identify spices. Maybe 3 or 4 small samples over the course of 5 minutes. "That might have saved her life," Dr. Chen said grimly. "A full serving would have been catastrophic. As it is, we're looking at acute lead poisoning, but manageable if we act fast." In the waiting room, Ashford paced like a trapped animal. He'd made more calls in the last 30 minutes than most people made in a week. His legal team was already investigating the restaurant's supply chain. His security team was reviewing footage from Saffron and Cedar's security cameras. And his personal assistant was tracking down Isabella and Mrs. Alvarez. Chef Hassan sat in a plastic chair, his head in his hands, his chef's whites still pristine despite the chaos. "This is my fault," he kept repeating. "I should have caught it. I should have tested every shipment personally." "This isn't your fault, Omar," Ashford said, pausing in his pacing. "Someone deliberately contaminated that turmeric. This was attempted murder. The only question is whether I was the target or if this is part of a larger food safety crisis." His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. "Found the source. Turmeric came from a new supplier, Brooklyn-based import company. Only started working with the restaurant 3 weeks ago. Investigating owners now." Ashford's jaw tightened. 3 weeks. Someone had been planning this for 3 weeks, had infiltrated his favorite restaurant's supply chain, had poisoned the one dish he ordered every time he visited Saffron and Cedar, the lamb shoulder Marrakesh. It was his signature order, something that anyone who'd done even basic research would know. This wasn't random. This was targeted. And Maria Rodriguez had stumbled into the crossfire. Maria woke to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the steady beep of medical equipment. Her throat burned, her mouth tasted like metal and charcoal, and every muscle in her body ached as though she'd run a marathon. But she was alive. That single fact penetrated through the fog of medication and confusion. She was alive. "Easy," a gentle voice said. A nurse appeared in her field of vision, adjusting the IV line in Maria's arm. "You're at Jackson Memorial Hospital. You've been here for about 6 hours. You're going to be okay, but you need to rest." "Isabella," Maria croaked, trying to sit up. Pain lanced through her abdomen where they'd performed the gastric lavage. "My daughter. Where's my daughter?" "She's safe," the nurse assured her, pressing a button to raise the head of the bed slightly. "She's in the waiting room with an older woman, Mrs. Alvarez, I believe, and there's a gentleman who's been sitting outside your room since you arrived. He's been very insistent about making sure you have the best care." Before Maria could process this information, the door opened and Dr. Chen entered, tablet in hand, her expression professional but warm. "Miss Rodriguez," she said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Chen. You gave us quite a scare, but the chelation therapy is working. Your blood lead levels are dropping and we expect a full recovery." "The dish," Maria whispered, her mind still trying to piece together what had happened. "The turmeric was contaminated." "I tasted it. I told him." "Did I tell him?" "You did," Dr. Chen confirmed. "You identified all 23 spices, including the contaminated turmeric. Because you detected it and only consumed small amounts, you saved both your life and Mr. Ashford's. If he had eaten that dish, given his body weight and the concentration of lead chromate, he likely would not have survived." The weight of those words settled over Maria like a heavy blanket. She had saved a billionaire's life. She, a struggling single mother from Hialeah who could barely make rent, had saved one of the richest men in America. "Can I see my daughter?" Maria asked, tears pooling in her eyes. "Please. She must be so scared." Dr. Chen nodded and stepped out of the room. Moments later, the door burst open and Isabella ran in, her small face streaked with tears, her dark curls wild around her face. Mrs. Alvarez shuffled in behind her, looking exhausted but relieved. "Mummy!" Isabella sobbed, climbing carefully onto the bed, mindful of the tubes and wires. "I was so scared. The man said you were sick, but you'd be okay. But I wanted to see you." "I'm here, mi amor," Maria whispered, wrapping her arms around her daughter despite the pain. "I'm here. Everything's going to be okay." The man turned out to be Michael Ashford, who appeared in the doorway a moment later, looking haggard despite his expensive clothes. He'd removed his suit jacket, his tie was loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who'd spent 6 hours pacing a hospital corridor, which is exactly what he'd done. "Miss Rodriguez," he said quietly, staying near the door as if afraid to intrude on the reunion. "I'm glad to see you awake. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did tonight." Maria looked at him. This man who'd challenged her so cruelly just hours ago, who'd put her job on the line over what had seemed like a game. But there was nothing cruel in his expression now. There was gratitude, certainly, but also something else. Guilt, perhaps. Responsibility. "I should be thanking you," Maria said softly. "If you hadn't insisted I identify every spice, if I hadn't tasted the dish, you would have eaten it. You would have—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. They both understood how close he'd come to death. "My investigation team has been working non-stop," Ashford said, stepping further into the room. "We've traced the contaminated turmeric to a Brooklyn import company with ties to a business rival of mine. This was attempted murder, Miss Rodriguez, and you got caught in the crossfire. For that, I owe you more than I can possibly repay." The next morning, Maria's hospital room looked less like a medical facility and more like a florist's shop. Bouquets filled every available surface, gifts and cards stacked on the windowsill, and her phone, which Mrs. Alvarez had brought from the apartment, buzzed incessantly with messages and notifications. "You're famous," Isabella announced, sitting cross-legged on the visitor's chair, scrolling through Maria's phone with wide eyes. "Mummy, there are like 1,000,000 videos of you. Everyone's calling you the hero waitress. Look." Maria watched as her daughter played the now viral video. There she was, standing before Michael Ashford, identifying spice after spice with increasing confidence, then her collapse, the chaos that followed. The comment section was flooded with support, admiration and outrage at what had happened. "Justice for Maria," one comment read. "This woman is a genius and a hero. She should never have to worry about money again." "Ashford better take care of her," another demanded. "She literally saved his life." A gentle knock interrupted her reading. Ashford entered, accompanied by a woman in a sharp business suit carrying a leather briefcase. Behind them came Chef Hassan, looking considerably more rested than the night before, and a man Maria didn't recognize, wearing a badge that identified him as Detective Marcus Williams, Miami PD. "Miss Rodriguez," Ashford began, pulling up a chair while the others arranged themselves around the room. "I hope you don't mind, but I've brought some people who need to speak with you. First, this is Detective Williams. He's investigating the poisoning." The detective nodded respectfully. "Miss Rodriguez, I know you're recovering, so I'll make this brief. Thanks to your identification of the contaminated turmeric and Mr. Ashford's security team's investigation, We've arrested 3 individuals connected to a competing tech company. They attempted to poison Mr. Ashford as part of a corporate espionage scheme. Your testimony will be crucial to the case." Maria nodded slowly, processing this information. People had tried to murder Ashford over business. The ruthlessness of it was shocking, but in a city like Miami, where billions of dollars changed hands daily, perhaps it shouldn't have been. "We'll need a formal statement once you're released," Williams continued. "But I wanted to thank you personally. Your knowledge and quick thinking prevented a tragedy and helped us crack this case wide open." After the detective left, Ashford gestured to the woman in the business suit. "This is Catherine Morrison, my personal attorney. We've prepared some documents for you to review, but I want to be clear, there's no pressure. You've been through a traumatic experience, and you should take time to consider everything carefully." Catherine opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Miss Rodriguez, Mr. Ashford would like to ensure that you're fully compensated for what happened. First, all of your medical expenses, both current and future related to this incident, will be covered completely. Second, we've established a trust fund for your daughter, Isabella, that will cover her education through graduate school, including all living expenses." Maria's breath caught in her throat. Isabella's education, fully funded. No student loans, no working 3 jobs to afford textbooks, no choosing between tuition and rent. Tears began streaming down her face. "Additionally," Catherine continued gently, "Mr. Ashford would like to offer you a position as a consultant for his company's food safety division. We're launching an initiative to improve supply chain transparency in the restaurant industry. Your expertise would be invaluable, and the compensation would be considerable. $200,000 annually, with full benefits." The room seemed to spin. $200,000. That was more money than Maria had ever imagined making in a year. That was security. That was Isabella's inhaler refills without anxiety. That was a bigger apartment, maybe even a house someday. "I don't know what to say," Maria whispered, looking at Ashford through her tears. "This is too much. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Ashford said firmly, leaning forward. "You did what almost no one could do. You have an extraordinary gift, Miss Rodriguez. You identified 23 spices under impossible pressure, detected a poison that would have killed me, and saved both our lives in the process. This isn't charity. This is recognition of exceptional talent and bravery." Chef Hassan stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "He's right, Maria. What you did last night was remarkable. And I'd like to add something, if I may." Chef Hassan smiled warmly at Maria, his eyes reflecting genuine affection and respect. "I've been cooking for 30 years, studied under masters in Morocco, Lebanon, and Turkey. But what you did last night reminded me why I fell in love with food in the first place. It's not just about following recipes or impressing critics. It's about understanding ingredients at a fundamental level, respecting them, knowing their stories." He pulled out a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a bronze medallion on a simple chain. "This belonged to my grandmother, who taught me everything I know about spices. She could identify any spice blindfolded, just by touch and smell. She would have been proud of you. I'd like you to have it." Maria accepted the medallion with trembling hands, the weight of its history and meaning settling around her neck as Chef Hassan fastened the clasp. Isabella watched with wide eyes, understanding that something important was happening, even if she couldn't fully grasp the significance. "And," Chef Hassan continued, "when you're ready, when you've recovered fully, I'd like to offer you a position at Saffron and Cedar, not as a server, as our Director of Spice Procurement and Quality Control. You'll work directly with our suppliers, Test every shipment. Ensure that what happened last night never happens again. To anyone. Anywhere. The room fell silent as the weight of these offers settled over everyone present. Maria looked at Isabella, at Mrs. Alvarez, who stood quietly in the corner dabbing her eyes with a tissue, at these people who had entered her life so dramatically and were now offering to transform it completely. "I need some time," Maria said finally, her voice stronger now despite the lingering effects of the poisoning. "These are incredible opportunities, and I'm grateful beyond words. But I need to think about what's best for Isabella, for our future. I need to make sure I'm making decisions for the right reasons, not just because I'm overwhelmed." Ashford nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the response I'd hoped to hear. Take all the time you need. The offers stand, regardless of when you're ready to accept them." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "I'll leave you to rest, but before I go, there's one more thing." He pulled out his phone and showed Maria the screen. It displayed a GoFundMe page that had been started by the diners who'd witnessed her collapse. The goal had been set at $50,000 to help with medical expenses. The current total read $347,823. "People wanted to help," Ashford said simply. The story resonated. A single mother working 2 jobs, saving a billionaire's life while risking her own. It's the kind of story that reminds people that heroes come in unexpected forms. Maria stared at the number, unable to process it. $347,000 from strangers, people she'd never met, would never meet, who'd simply seen a video and decided her courage deserved recognition. "The world can be cruel," Chef Hassan said quietly, "but it can also be surprisingly kind." Over the next hour, various people filtered in and out of Maria's room. Hospital staff who wanted to shake her hand. Reporters who were politely turned away by Ashford's security team. A representative from the James Beard Foundation, inquiring about nominating her for a special recognition award. Even the mayor of Miami sent a video message calling her an exemplar of courage and expertise. But the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Chen returned for an evening checkup and found Maria and Isabella curled up together on the hospital bed, reading one of Isabella's favorite books. The doctor paused in the doorway, tablet in hand, and smiled. "Your blood work is looking excellent," Dr. Chen said softly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. "Another day of observation, and I think we can send you home, though I suspect home might look very different soon." Maria looked up from the book. Isabella nestled against her shoulder, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by struggle. A future where Isabella's medical needs weren't a source of constant anxiety, where education wasn't an impossible dream, but a guaranteed reality, where Maria's knowledge and skills were valued not just with words, but with opportunities. "Yes," Maria said, pulling her daughter closer, "I think you might be right." 3 months later, Maria Rodriguez stood in the conference room of Ashford's TechCore Industries headquarters, presenting to a room full of restaurant industry executives, food safety officials, and supply chain managers. The bronze medallion from Chef Hassan hung around her neck, a reminder of where she'd been and how far she'd come. Lead chromate contamination in turmeric is just one example of the food safety crisis we face, she explained, clicking through her presentation slides with confidence that would have seemed impossible just months ago. But with proper testing protocols and blockchain-verified supply chains, we can prevent these tragedies before they happen. In the front row, Michael Ashford watched with undisguised pride. Hiring Maria had been one of his best decisions. She'd thrown herself into the role with passionate dedication, studying food safety regulations, visiting spice farms across the country, developing testing protocols that were now being adopted by restaurants nationwide. She wasn't just a consultant, she'd become the face of a movement. After the presentation, as executives lined up to exchange business cards and ask questions, Maria caught sight of Isabella watching through the glass door, Mrs. Alvarez beside her. They'd just come from Isabella's appointment at the new pediatric pulmonologist, a specialist Maria could now afford without a second thought. The inhaler costs that once kept her awake at night were now barely a line item in her budget. That evening, Maria and Isabella sat in their new apartment in Coral Gables, a spacious two-bedroom with a real kitchen where Maria could experiment with spices to her heart's content. Isabella was doing homework at the dining table while Maria prepared dinner, her hands moving with practiced ease through jars of cumin, coriander, and saffron. "Mummy," Isabella called out, "I have to write an essay about heroes. Can I write about you?" Maria paused, a jar of cardamom in her hand, and smiled. "Mi amor, I'm not a hero. I just did what I knew how to do." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Isabella insisted, with the certainty of a 7-year-old. "You were brave when you were scared. You used your brain to solve a problem, and you saved someone's life. That's what my teacher said heroes do." Later that night, after Isabella had fallen asleep, Maria stood at her kitchen window, looking out over the Miami skyline. She thought about the night that had changed everything, about standing before Michael Ashford with her job on the line, about the impossible challenge and the poison she'd detected. She thought about Abuela Carmen and Mr. Khalil, about all the people who taught her to trust her senses and value her knowledge. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chef Hassan. "New shipment of spices arriving tomorrow. Want to do the inspection together? I could use your expertise." She smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." The story of the waitress who saved a billionaire's life had faded from the headlines, replaced by newer dramas and fresher scandals. But its impact rippled outward in ways both large and small. Saffron and Cedar had become a model for food safety in the industry. Other restaurants were implementing Maria's testing protocols. A scholarship program had been established in her name for hospitality workers pursuing culinary education. But perhaps the most important change was the one that couldn't be measured in dollars or headlines. Maria Rodriguez, who'd once believed her value was determined by the tips she earned and the tables she served, now understood her true worth. Her knowledge, her skills, her courage, they had always mattered. The world had just needed a dramatic moment to recognize it. As she climbed into bed that night, Maria thought about the 23 spices she'd identified, and the 23rd one that had nearly killed them both: turmeric. The golden spice that symbolized health and vitality, corrupted by greed and carelessness. But from that contamination had come something pure: recognition, opportunity, and the chance to ensure no one else would face the same danger. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for Isabella's health, for the courage she'd found when she needed it most. Sometimes she realized life's most bitter moments contain the seeds of its sweetest transformations. You just have to be brave enough to taste them. And so ends the remarkable story of Maria Rodriguez, a single mother who transformed an impossible challenge into a life-changing opportunity. Her journey reminds us that expertise and courage can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that one moment of bravery can ripple outward to change not just one life, but an entire industry. From struggling waitress to respected food safety consultant, Maria proved that knowledge is power, intuition is invaluable, and heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear server uniforms and carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. Thank you for reading. Remember, your skills and knowledge matter more than you know. Never underestimate the power of expertise, courage, and speaking up when something isn't right. Your voice could save lives.